horror movies. They terrify us, thrill us, and keep us coming back for more. But how did this genre evolve from grainy, silent shorts to the modern blockbusters we see today? Today, we're going to take a journey through the spine-chilling history of horror cinema, starting with the very first fright-filled flicks, the silent beginnings. Let's rewind all the way back to 1896. Horror first made its appearance on the screen with Georges Méliès' The House of the Devil. It's often considered the first horror film ever made, though it was more playful than scary. Still, it set the stage for what was to come. Fast forward to 1920, when German Expressionism gave us The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. This film was a game changer. Its distorted sets and shadowy visuals were unsettling and hypnotic. Then, in 1922, Nosferatu introduced the world to vampires. Though, technically, it was an unauthorised adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. By the time we got to The Phantom of the Opera in 1925, Hollywood was catching on, and Lon Chaney's makeup became iconic. The Universal Monsters. Now, let's move into the golden age of monsters, the 1930s. This is when Universal Studios really shaped the horror genre. In 1931, Bela Lugosi's Dracula and Boris Karloff's Frankenstein defined what horror could be. These weren't just films, they were cultural phenomena. And it didn't stop there. The Mummy followed in 1932, and The Wolfman came in 1941. These films made the monsters into stars, larger-than-life figures that were both terrifying and strangely relatable. And let's not forget Todd Browning's Freaks from 1932. This one was controversial and ahead of its time, using real circus performers to tell a chilling tale of revenge. Then we come to the atomic age of psychological horror. The 1950s were a fascinating time for horror because they reflected the fears of the era. Nuclear weapons and the Cold War loomed large, and movies like Godzilla in 1954 captured those anxieties perfectly. But it wasn't just about the giant monsters. Horror started getting psychological too. Night of the Hunter in 1955, for example, blended horror with film noir to give us one of the most chilling villains in cinema history. And filmmakers were also experimenting with gimmicks. William Castle's House on Haunted Hill in 1959 came with Emergo, where skeletons literally flew over the audience during screenings. The modern horror revolution. In the 1960s, horror began to really grow up. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho in 1960 was groundbreaking. With its shocking twists, it showed that horror didn't need to be monsters. It could be rooted in human psychology. This decade also gave us The Haunting in 1963, which was all about atmosphere, and Night of the Living Dead in 1968, the birth of the modern zombie movie. It was raw, brutal, and it reflected the chaos of the times. And then Rosemary's Baby from the same year. This was horror at its most intimate and insidious, tapping into fears of betrayal and paranoia. The slasher and supernatural boom. The 1970s and 80s were an explosion of creativity in horror. In 1973, The Exorcist shocked audiences and became a box office sensation. Then, in 1974, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre introduced us into a gritty, low-budget horror that felt disturbingly real. And of course, John Carpenter's Halloween in 1978 created the blueprint for the slasher genre. Suddenly, we had masked killers like Michael Myers and later Jason Voorhees, and then Freddy Krueger haunting our nightmares. The 80s took things to another level, with movies like A Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984 and Hellraiser in 1987, where horror became more surreal and gory, pushing boundaries and bringing in fantasy elements. Self-referential and global horror. By the 90s, horror was reflecting on itself. Wes Craven's Scream in 1996 was both a slasher film and a clever commentary on the genre. It was fun, self-aware, and scary all at once. At the same time, international horror was making waves. Japanese horror, or J-horror, started influencing Hollywood, especially with films like Ringu, which inspired The Ring, and we definitely can't skip over the Blair Witch Project in 1999. This little indie film popularised the found footage style and proved you didn't need a big budget to terrify audiences. torture, found footage, and elevated horror. The 2000s saw a mix of extremes. Movies like Saw and Hostel ushered in the torture porn era, gruesome, graphic horror that wasn't for the faint-hearted. But at the same time, found footage was booming with paranormal activity. In the 2010s, horror entered what some call the elevated horror era. Films like Get Out in 2017 and Hereditary in 2018 were as much about storytelling and deeper themes as they were about the scares. Streaming platforms also gave horror a new life, with series like The Haunting of Hill House and films like Fear Street. And today, movies like Smile and Barbarian continue to push the genre forward, mixing psychological tension with jump scares and innovation. So, from grainy silent films to today's blockbusters, horror has consistently evolved, reflecting the fears and anxieties of each other. So, the next time you sit down for a scary movie, think about its roots. It's part of a genre that's been scarring us for over 100 years. Look, thanks for watching today's video, and let me know in the comments what's your favourite horror movie. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for updates, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into film history.